We're glad that Andy had a wonderful time away, that he's come back refreshed. He was at Music Week at Ridgecrest, North Carolina. As I shared Wednesday night, I've never been there. I've always wanted to take a group of folks there to Sunday School Week because I think it would help our Sunday school and breathe some life into it because they have some very good conferences there. This morning, I'm going to be speaking about something that I consider that will be one of the most important messages that I have preached, or perhaps will preach in a long time, because I think this message deals with every single person in this room today, including myself. Today we're going to be talking about conflict. People have conflict in their life. All of us have conflict in our life. Sometimes there's conflict between husband and wife. Sometimes there's conflict between parents and children. Sometimes there's conflict with a boyfriend and girlfriend. Or perhaps there's just conflict in the community that you're involved in. Or some of you, there may be conflict at your work. You may be a boss, or you may be an employer or employee, but there's conflict. Sometimes people see things differently, and so there's always conflict. And so the most important skill that we can learn is how to resolve conflict. Can I be honest with you? When I was in school, I was never taught anything about conflict resolution. In college, I didn't have a course on it. I don't think they offered a course. You would think in seminary they'd offer a course on it. I didn't take the course on it. These are things I had to learn after I got out of school. Because these are not taught in school. They should be. Because there's so much conflict in our lives today. And see, when there's conflict, it just literally does what? It sucks the life out of you. That's all you think about. And so this morning, I want us to understand, God recognizes that we're going to have conflict in our life. If you got your Bibles, turn over to Romans chapter 12. We'll begin reading verse number 17. Never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. Now notice, do all you can, as much as possible, as far as it depends on you. Try to live at peace with everyone. God recognizes that there are some people you cannot live at peace with. He understands that. You don't want conflict in your life. You don't want arguments, but sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it is impossible to live at peace with people. Why? You can't control somebody else's actions. All you can control is what you do. So it says, as far as it depends on you, try to live at peace with everyone. Now, why does God want us to be at peace with everyone? Unresolved conflict has three damaging effects. And this is still my introduction this morning. We're going to look at these three things. Three reasons why God does not want conflict in our life. First of all, it blocks my fellowship with God. You see, when I'm in conflict with other people, I cannot have a clear connection with God. Okay, you may say, give me a verse and some scripture. Okay, how about 1 John chapter 4, verse 20? Notice what it says. If anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And so you cannot love God and love your neighbor, and not love your neighbor as yourself. You cannot be in harmony with God and out of harmony with people in your life. You see, every time I get in conflict with somebody, my fellowship with God is blocked. That's why God's concerned about conflict in our life. There's a second reason. It hinders my prayers. In other words, when I pray, it prevents my prayers from being answered. So when I have conflict, and when there's sin, and when there is disharmony in my life, it blocks my prayers. It hinders my prayers. First Peter says, matter of fact, he gets very personal. He says, when I'm in conflict with my wife, he says, hey, you better make that right before you pray. That's what Peter says about family relationships. And so we see here that it hinders my prayers. Third thing, it hinders my happiness. You cannot be happy and be in conflict at the same time. When conflict comes in the front door, happiness goes right out the back door. And so this morning we're going to talk about how to resolve conflict in your life. And this morning, if I were you, I'd jot these things down. We're going to jot down several things about conflict. First of all, the first thing is you need to take initiative. In other words, if you're in conflict with somebody, you don't wait for them to come to you. You go to them. You be the peacemaker. He is saying, don't ignore the conflict. Don't deny the conflict. Don't push the conflict under the rug. Because conflict is never resolved accidentally. We have to face conflict head on in order for it to be resolved. You remember the expression that people say, time heals everything? Folks, that's not true. How do I know that? If time healed everything, you could just go to the doctor, sit in the waiting room, and you would be healed and never see the doctor. Time makes things worse, especially conflict. When you have an open wound and you do not deal with it, what happens? It grows. It begins to fester up. Gangrene can set in. And pretty soon you may have to have your hand or your arm removed because you've not dealt with it. And so problems get worse when you just ignore them. How do I know that? Most of the time when there's conflict, people get angry. Anger turns to resentment. Resentment turns to bitterness. And you know, and I'm not talking about anybody particular this morning, but you have met folks just like this that are elderly, and they're bitter. Why? Because they had conflict in their life 50 years ago, it was unresolved, and now they're 70, 80 years old, and they're just bitter. They're just mad at the world. And it's because there was a conflict years ago in their life that was never resolved. And so they missed 50 years of happiness because they just swept things under the rug and never dealt with it. So you take the initiative. It's what Paul's saying. Talk to them about the problem. What happens when we have problems in our life or conflict? We talk to everybody else. This person's made me mad. This person's upset me. This person's done this to me. But we never talk to the person that caused it, that we're in conflict with. And so we need to talk to them and not everybody else. Now here's the problem. When I say take the initiative. When you take the initiative, you know what happens to me? I always have fear in my life. I'm afraid. I'm supposed to go to that person that is mad at me, that is in conflict with me. I'm supposed to go to them. Well, there's fear in my life. I don't know that. I don't know how they're going to respond. But you see, fear goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve messed up in their life. They were in conflict. They blew it in the Garden of Eden. Their relationship with God was broken. And then notice, it broke their relationship with each other. So they're hiding after they have sinned. They don't want to get near God. Because why? They don't want to face the reality of conflict that they have with God. So they run from God. There's fear in their life. Look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 10. Adam answered, I heard you, God, in the garden. I was afraid because, why? I was naked. So what did I do? I hid. Now the word naked there means exposed. Adam says, God, I was exposed. Now you see, this is what he's saying. Adam is saying, God, you can see everything about me and Eve. And because you can see everything about me, I was afraid, and so I hid. And so men have been hiding from God ever since. And men and women have been hiding from each other ever since. You see, when you are in conflict, you want to just hide. It makes you distant. You want to withdraw. You want to pull back from that person. You see, only courageous people resolve conflict. Cowards never resolve conflict. They walk away from it. They don't face it. So where do you find the courage to face conflict? Well, you get it from God. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God did not give us a spirit of being timid, but a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. You see, when God's Spirit fills your life, He gives you the power to face conflict in your life. You can probably turn on the news almost any time, and you're going to hear stories about somebody. Maybe there's a burning building, and all of a sudden this building is about to cave in. And all of a sudden you'll see this person in the crowd just running that building as fast as they can. And you wonder, why they're going in that building? Where do they get that courage from? And then a few minutes they come out and they have a baby in their arms. Or perhaps a pet. What caused them to overcome their fear? What gave them such courage in their life? It was love for that person or that pet that was in there. Now, what does the Bible say about God? God is love. God's love. So when you're filled with the Spirit of God, you're filled with love for that person who is irritating you, or that person that you're in conflict with, or that person that's under your skin, you're going to have courage to move ahead because you're filled with God's Spirit, and God's Spirit fills us with the Spirit of love. And so that's how you overcome your fear of taking the initiative. But then also, in taking the initiative, timing is always important. Timing is everything in conflict resolution. You have to do it at the right time. Now let me just say this. God expects us as Christians to be peacemakers. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 22 and 23. So if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that somebody has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person, then coming offer your sacrifice to God. That's tough, isn't it? You know what that says? Reconciliation takes priority over worship. I didn't think anything took priority over worship. But here it says reconciliation takes priority over worship, because God realizes that if you're not reconciled, it affects your worship of Him. And so choose the right time. Choose the right place. Choose a place where it's quiet, where you can sit down and not be bothered. Choose a place where you can talk frankly and honestly with that person. But then there's something else that's very important. Before you take the initiative, before you meet with that person, you need to get on your knees and you need to pray. You need to just get on your knees and say, God, I'm scared to do what I'm about to do, what you've asked me to do. God, I want you to fill me with your Spirit. I want you to fill me with your love. And God, I need you to help me do this right thing. And so what happens? When you're on your knees with God, you go with a positive attitude. In other words, you want to work the problem out. You don't want to attack each other or the other person. You want to spend that time working on the issues. Now, really boils down to this. Somebody says, why should I take the initiative? I'm going to tell you why. And you can argue with me, but you don't need to argue with me, you need to argue with God. You know why you should take the initiative? God commands it. So if you have a problem with that, you need to argue with Him. Okay? Let's move to the second thing. Number 2, conflict resolution. Confess my part of the conflict. Can I be honest with you, most conflict, it's not 50-50. Sometimes it is. But most of the time, it could be 99 and then 1%. 99 is somebody else's fault, 1% your fault. But when you meet with them, you confess the 1% or whatever you've done wrong, you confess it. You don't start condemning them. You don't start accusing them. Instead of accusing them, attacking them, and blaming them, you start with humility. You deal with the part you did wrong. I'm sorry I said this. I'm sorry I did that. And the reason we do that is because all of us have blind spots. Now, some of us have bald spots, but all of us have blind spots, okay? Look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 3. Why do you notice a little piece of dust in your friend's eye, but you don't notice the big piece of wood in your own eye? In other words, we all have these blind spots. Do you know the number one excuse today for divorce is incompatibility? They say, well, hey, we're just incompatible. Let me just say this. Incompatibility is a myth. It's made up by divorce lawyers. Two people can get along if they will stop being self-centered, or they will just stop being stubborn. You're never going to marry somebody just like you. And so can I just say this? You are incompatible with everybody because there's nobody just like you. Nobody. You see, you choose to love people, or you choose not to love people. Love is a choice. You choose what you're going to love. And so more relationships die because people are unwilling to take the first step and unwilling to show just a little bit of humility. It's kind of like a traffic jam or a log jam. All these logs are in the river and they are stopped up and they can't move, they can't go forward, and no log knows which ones to move first. And so it's a log jam. And so how do you break up a relational log jam? Humility. You make the first move. Humility breaks the log jam. Now let me just say this. This sentence will break any relational log jam. And it's very simple. I'm sorry. I was only thinking of myself. That will break any logjam. If you'll just use that. I'm sorry, I was only thinking of myself. Number 3. Listen, look at James chapter 1, verse 19. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. You notice all of us have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So really what he's saying is listen twice as much as you talk. When you listen, you learn. You see, listening is the key to understanding where people are coming from. Because sometimes you go, I don't know where that person is coming from. Well, sometimes maybe we just haven't listened to them enough. Or sometimes we may not understand their circumstances. They have some fears. They have some little hang-ups in their life that maybe we don't know about. And so when we listen, we find out about those things. Also, sometimes we'll understand their backgrounds. All of our backgrounds are different. Maybe something happened in this individual's background that you don't know anything about. They never shared with anybody. And that may be why they're doing what they do. So when you listen, this may come out in your discussion. But in other words, when we listen, it helps us understand their perspective. And so we have to listen. Number 4, consider their perspective. Consider their viewpoint. In other words, you intentionally shift your focus from your needs and away from winning the argument to their needs. In other words, you try to get their perspective on the issue. Who is going to make the first move? The person who makes the first move is always the person who stops saying, how do I see it? But then he starts thinking about how do they see it? What are they going through their life? See, they might be going through a lot of things in their life. You don't even have a clue that they're going through their life. Look at some scripture on this. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. Notice, each of you should not look to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Look at verse 5. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. There's an old Chinese proverb that says this. We seek first to understand before we seek to be understood. In other words, we try to understand the other person before we try to get them to understand us. Now, how do you focus? How do you consider another person's perspective? You focus in on their perspective. You realize that you are more like Christ. Listen now, I want you to get this because you miss this, it's very important. You're more like Christ when you pay attention to other people's needs. You can never be more Christ-like in your life than when you pay attention to other person's needs. You know what most people say? Well, I've got needs as well. What about my needs? Well, here's the answer. Look at Psalm 139, verse 3. You see me when I travel. This is talking about David, I think is writing this. It's talking to God. He said, you see me when I travel, when I rest at home. You know everything that I do. What about your needs? Well, you're saying I'm supposed to focus on the other part. What about my needs? I've got needs as well. Who's going to meet my needs? What that verse is saying is, if you're a Christian, you believe there's a God in heaven, you believe He's in control, and who is there to notice and take care of every single one of your needs? Well, God. God does. And so, really, you're not alone in this. So God says to us, I will meet your needs. But meeting your needs, I want you to be concerned about the needs of others. But if you're not going to be concerned about the needs of others, I'm not going to take care of your needs. You see how it's kind of a circular effect? God says, I promise you I'll take care of your needs, but first you must take care of the needs of others. And then I'll meet your needs. Number 5, tell the truth tactfully. In other words, speak the truth in love. It may be true. There's a lot of folks that say true things, but man, they don't speak in love. You know what happens? In our heart, we know what they're saying is true, but the tone of voice they use, the way they say it, it just turns us off. And so it says, speak the truth in love. You see, if you don't speak the truth in love, you're already on the wrong side. You never use truth as a club to beat somebody. You never use truth to beat other people over the head. Look at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise do what? It brings healing. It heals. Foolish words hurt. Wise words heal. You see, you're never persuasive when you're abrasive. You know, we meet a lot of folks, we know what they're saying is true, but they're just so abrasive in how they're saying it. They're beating us over the head with what we already know is true, and so we're turned off by that. And so, truth wrapped in love is always received. You see, people must trust you before you can tell them the truth. They learn to trust you when you prove that you love them. You see, when you prove that you love them, you can say things to them normally you could not say because they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you love them. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And so before we speak, will you guys the words, is this helpful? Is this hurtful for them? Is this going to build them up or is this going to tear them down? Really, this is what it's saying. Attack the problem, not the person. Now, when do we normally see this? In politics. You know what I hate about politics and commercials? You know, when it's political season, you can't turn on the television because of all these ads. You ever notice they don't say, this is why I disagree with this person's position. This is what's going to happen. You know, if you pass this bill, this is negative things going to happen. Or this, you know, people are going to lose jobs. You know, it's going to drive up unemployment, all this. They don't normally say this. What do? They get up there and they say, this politician I'm running against, he's just a bald-faced liar. He said this over here, now he said this there. And what they do? They attack the person and never the problem. And so we need to make sure that when we have conflict with somebody, we're going to attack the person. We attack the problem. This is a problem. Number 6, fix the problem and not the blame. In other words, we have to ask ourselves a question. What is more important to me? To blame them or to resolve the conflict? In other words, we need to fix the problem and not the blame. Now, I preached a message on this. I know y'all remember this. This has been a long, long time ago. I talked about marriage, fighting fair, ground rules for fighting in marriage. Well, you know, there ought to be some ground rules, especially in fighting in marriage. You know, there's some things that you should never say in marriage. You know why? Because you know if you say those things, they're like weapons of mass destruction. You know, as soon as you say them, it's like pushing a button. And that person's going to go in defensive mode, your mate's going to go in defensive mode, and they're just going to go ballistic on you. It's kind of like, you know, back during the Cold War. We have America with all these nuclear weapons. We have Russia with all these nuclear weapons. Now, let's just be honest. America can push a button and just wipe Russia off the map. Russia can push a button and wipe America off the map. It's been that way since the 50s. But why has it never happened? I'm going to tell you why. The reason it never happened is because they understand the consequences of what would happen. They're weapons of mass destruction. Nobody would be here. They'd destroy all life. So what I'm trying to say is, in your marriage, in relationships, there are certain things that you can say that's weapons of mass destruction. Now let me just give you a few in marriage, okay? We're talking about relationships in general, but let's just say in marriage. Well, if you do that, I'm going to divorce you. Well, you know what's going to happen. I guarantee if somebody says that, there's going to be a divorce. That's weapons of mass destruction. Or, I hate everybody in your family. Or, your family always does that. Well, that's weapons of mass destruction. It's destroying the relationship. It's not building it up. And you see, in our relationships, we need to do everything to build up and not tear down. Look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 8. But now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger and rage and malice and slander and filthy language from your lips. Look at Romans chapter 14, verse 13. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way. Now, blaming is kind of a form of judgment. It's all your fault. It's not my fault. It's all your fault. Well, blaming is a form of judging. And folks, only God has a right to judge. You don't know the other person's motivation. You don't know why anybody does what they do. Only God is a judge. And so we should not blame and say, hey, it's all your fault, this, that, and the other. Number 7, and we're almost through. Focus on reconciliation, not resolution. Now, what's the difference there? Reconciliation means what? It means work on re-establishing the relationship. Resolution means solving every issue. I'll be honest with you, there's some things you're never going to agree on. I hate to say this, but there's nobody who agrees with you on everything. There's nobody who agrees with me on everything. I got to know that we're all different. We have different personalities. I know that men and women are different. We see things different. You know, when a man goes to buy a car, he's going to raise the hood. He's going to look at the motor. You know what the woman is going to do? She's going to look at the outside and she says, well, it looks nice. See, we think different. We do things different. There are age differences. You know, there's folks who grew up in the Great Depression. Debt is a no-no. There's younger folks, debt, hey, everybody's got it, so I'm going to get it too. You see, we view things differently. There's personality differences. You know, there's some folks that don't mean anything. They're short to the point. I mean, you know, almost to the point where, you know, there's some folks that, you know, I walk up to them and say, how do you like the outfit? And they're going to look and they're going to say, it doesn't match. Well, my guys, in the first place, they didn't want to be honest with me. You know, that's my fault. But then there's some folks that get mad. Well, you notice how they said that? Well, you asked them an honest question, they gave you an honest answer. But you see, there's personality differences. People do things differently. But what I'm trying to say is you can have a loving relationship without agreeing on everything. You can have unity without uniformity. Now, I've said this before. I've used this illustration before. You want unity? You know what you do? Find 2 cats. Tie their tails together. Throw them over a clothesline. You got unity. But folks, I'm going to tell you what. You don't have uniformity at all. They're going to be fussing and fighting like cats and dogs. And so you can have unity without uniformity. And you know what that's called? Wisdom. You see, if you focus on the relationship and not the issues, you're going to find there's certain issues that are not even worth fighting over. Now, the world is filled with conflict. There's disagreements, there's anger, there's envy, there's division. Where everything else in the world tends to divide, I want to challenge this church to become an agent of reconciliation. Everything else in the world divides. I want this church to be a uniter, who brings people together. In other words, this morning, all of us as Christians, we need to dedicate ourselves to be a bridge builder. What does a bridge builder do? It's a way for over a gulf, over something that's impassable. It builds a road over. We need to be bridge builders, not wall builders. When you build walls, what happens? Well, this is my wall. You're not going to cross that wall. You can't cross it. And so I challenge this church to be bridge builders, not wall builders. Now let me just say this, and this is the most important thing I'm going to say all day long, okay? Everybody listening? Everybody's ears on? Sitting up straight? All right, here we go. You are more like Jesus when you reconcile people than any other time in your life. How did I know that? It's scriptural. How did I know that? God sent Jesus to this earth to reconcile us. Why? We were in conflict with God. In other words, when you read Romans, it says we were enemies of God. We were at an impassable state. But what happened? God sent Jesus down to reconcile us, to make us right before God. Now, who took the initiative? God did. I was an enemy of God. But God took the initiative. He sent Jesus. He took the first step to come down to make things right in my life toward Him. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are what? The peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. You see, you can't make peace with other people